Okay, so let's start this as just the basics. I will need an intro. Hello, welcome to my channel. Here we talk about UX, which is user experience, and I'm hoping to get you familiar with the topic. I'm trying to be here to help. Apologies in advance for the structure of this video. I literally just talked for an hour. So what is UX? Well, UX stands for user experience. Today, most people might think of UX as how an app works on your phone, but that's a very limiting perspective of UX. User experience is, I think of it as literally everything. Living is a human experience, and how that gets done is my own UX of life. I want to talk about who would be good to get into UX, because there's definitely people who would not be good in UX. First off, if you struggle to empathize with other people's situations, this is not the industry or career for you. That's like your number one job responsibility. Yeah. So if you struggle to understand someone from what perspective they're coming from, or if you just, don't believe that a different perspective than what you've experienced can exist, sorry, you're not going to work in this field. But that's definitely an area of growth for you, that if you want to get into UX, work on that first. So empathy is key. One of the things I do like about UX is the qualities that make you really good in UX are a lot of soft skills and a lot of skills that were very underappreciated in regular roles that you could think of. Thinking a lot. You got to be a curious person, especially with research. I would say that's probably and of course what I'm stating is overgeneralizations. You can be a designer or researcher that has opposite characteristics of what I'm saying, but I think researchers tend to like to be in their head a little bit more. They like to analyze why, or, oh, that's curious. Let me observe this. Whereas designers might be a little more focused on solving a problem, or I think of them as kind of like Lego builders. Like they want to build it out together and be like, look at what I made. Whereas I want to be like, hey, let's make a house where the ice cream comes out of the shower head and you get to eat in the shower, or something. I don't want to actually have to figure out how that works, because then someone's going, that's probably not a great example. Okay, so let me think about traits of myself prior to going to grad school. I remember walking into a new restaurant and being like, well, this is dumb. They shouldn't have the cashier or cash register right there with the menus over there. There should be menus so you can look, but I bet the menus were in the walkway, in the entryway. It's like people are going to pick that up and look right there, but then you only have standing room for like 4 people. So it's like I just noticed things that were burdens or just not quite right, and that's what you kind of do as a researcher. You notice things that are not quite right, and then you tell someone, and then they go and fix it. That's what I love about research, is I don't have to fix it. I just tell you the problem and I literally used to say my ideal job would be if I could just tell everyone the problems and then leave. I would say, here's your issues, and then I can walk away. I don't have to deal with them. And that's UX research, baby. Kind of. You do have to advocate for these changes a lot more. If you're a consultancy, maybe not as much, but when you're integrated into the work, corporate, whatever level you do. And by God, that can be exhausting sometimes. Okay, let's get back to the idea of, I'm going to put a timer on for 1 minute. I'm going to just talk about each question. Okay, so UX basics. What is UX? Ready, set, timer. Okay, so UX is user experience. You're probably most familiar with an app and its interface, and think of that as the UX, which it is. But UX is also broader than that. So it's about how do you feel before using the app, without using the app. Does it make you anxious during it? We actually hold our breath while we're checking emails, which is not good for us, obviously. But that's a part of the UX. The app is responsible for that interaction that I'm experiencing. So UX is much broader than just apps. It's basically any technology, any tool, and how humans then interact with it. Everything is a design choice, from how cities are built, to how apps are built, to your outfit that you put on. When you think of it this way, everyone is a designer. You make choices, like I chose to put on this shirt to meet certain needs. My need to look somewhat professional for this video, but also be comfortable. That was a design choice. I think it's interesting to look at the world this way, because then you can truly see how things that maybe you put on yourself as a burden are not your fault and merely a bad design choice. So, like walkable cities, for an example, that's a great example. We could have tighter communities, happier people, less carbon emission. We could have a lot of good things if we would have designed cities to be walkable and to have little pockets of areas where communities could exist. However, we did not, and because that's such a large design choice that has many, what do you call it? When it's like, it's waterfalling, domino affecting other choices. Like if I build a street, that's gonna affect lots of different things after it. Whatever, you guys can fill in the blank there. It just makes it harder and harder to change, which, let me introduce you to a term, tech debt. So technical debt, and then UX debt. So tech debt is likely referring to kind of the software and the architecture of it and that back-end stuff. It would be ideal if our users could do this to this, but when we built it, we weren't thinking of that capability, so it can't do that. We can just build something on top of it to make that work, but then later on, that ends up, it's like, again, the domino effects of just like adding up these decisions, and maybe new features or new requests or new capabilities come through that you didn't originally design it for. UX debt is similar. It usually is more about the experience across multiple touch points. Touch points being another jargon. It's literally just a point where you interact with a product or some part of the company. So calling customer service would be a touch point. Using the app on my phone would be a touch point. Whatever the case is, I'm now interacting with them. And let me pull up an example. Okay, the Google definition is UX debt means the accumulation of fast and easy solutions that result in a negative user experience. I think it also is, working in silos. That's another industry jargon. Basically just means you're working like not collaboratively. So you exist in your own little world and you don't have too much cross communication. And then also just continue to go and not looking back and reflecting, okay, as a whole, what is this experience? I might evaluate every single page of my app individually and have good usability, but the overall usability maybe isn't as good because there's a ton of internal consistency issues. It basically just means issues that have built up that we now have to deal with, that it's debt. We're going to have to pay it down slowly, and it's going to be a lot of work. Okay, brief history of UX and other tangential terms, industry lingo. So a couple of industry lingo things have already come up. So in Notion, there's a page that's called UX Dictionary, and I try to add in both industry and UX terms that come up with a pretty basic definition of what it is. Like blue skies. Blue skies thinking, that just means like, okay, you have no limits in this world. What's the coolest, greatest, best thing that you can think of? There's no restraints. There's no constraints on thinking realistically. There's nothing like that. Blue skies. Blue skies ahead. Everything's great. I feel like I didn't truly talk my 1 minute about whatever that thing was. Brief history of UX. Oh yeah, I just talked about industry lingo. So let me go start my minute. User experience is the newest term for a field that has been around for a while and has just shape-shifted a little bit. UX really has been prominent in the internet and tech stage of product development. You can also see this called human factors ergonomics. So it was a human, and then what factors are gonna come up because of the interaction, and how do you make a product fit that best, the ergonomic part. So that's more like car design, product design, things like that. UX really is referenced a lot as being developed when with pilot dashboards or military things. There's just so many human errors, and when it's deathly, you definitely want to avoid that. Service design is a tangent. Like service design, I immediately think of like conferences. So designing how people are going to check in and get their badges, and then how they're going to choose which places to go, and how are we going to organize both the experience they have and the back experience of getting our speakers aligned and checked in and blah, 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 all those complexities. So it is UX. They just, have a different term because you don't necessarily refer to people attending a conference as users. They'd be attendees. Okay. I did my minute there. Okay, so you want to get into UX, what to know before starting. I think more people should be in UX. We would have a better world if we had more people able to look at things from a perspective of the user's never wrong. We can design our product differently. And once you really have that as a cornerstone in your perspective of the world, you'll see everything differently. Dude, nothing is my fault. You can't get me to be accountable for anything. It is a little concerning how many things I can be like, it's not on me. Okay, good personality fit though. I do think that more introverts are in UX. The more I reference things like this, the more like research I'm gonna have to back up. So I'm gonna probably try to stop doing that because I don't want more work. This was presented to me at a conference. I think it was like 70% are introverts. I think that's because there is a lot of thinking and processing and empathizing that happens. A lot of people with good interpersonal relational skills, especially as a researcher, one of the key aspects that you do in a user interview is make sure that the person you're interviewing is comfortable, trusts you, feels okay to criticize something you're showing them. You build rapport in these short periods. You have to be open-minded because people are going to bring you perspectives, scenarios, things that you've never experienced. You have to be able to accept that that might be the reality for them. Now, as a researcher, you also know that what people say is not always what people do, but that's a whole nother thing. You have to be open-minded to get criticism back from your colleagues, especially as a UX designer. You have to have a lot of humility, and I think this is one of the areas that we see a lot of issues come up in the industry is because a lot of UX designers or product designers come from an art background. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the vibe I've always gotten is that art schools train you to think that the general public won't accept your art, or good art goes beyond, not everyone's going to get it. People aren't going to like it at first. You have to be adamant about this is the way, and then it will pay off at the end. Those are all very counterintuitive to UX. One, UX design is not art. It's also not product design. UX design is dictated by users, how they use it, and the reality of their context, and your design is secondary. UX designers that come in with this kind of, I guess, art school product design mindset of like, the designer knows better than the general public. It's not a good attitude to have in UX. It just doesn't work. Job opportunities and pay. There's definitely a ton more UX design roles than researcher roles. It's a growing field, and UX designers are the first ones hired in because people realize like, oh, we can't just code this out, we need someone to design it first. But companies usually don't understand is that UX design needs research in order to be effective. So UX designers can be trained to know how to do user testing, usability stuff, but I would say it's very unlikely that they know how to do generative user interviews, so stuff before you have a product to test out. And not to say that they can't, but just it's not something I would expect if I were hiring a UX designer. Just the way I can use Figma, but I do not have an expertise in it. I be breaking things all the time. UX researchers tend to make more and tend to be higher educated, mainly because a lot of people come from academia, academic research. There's a lot of people with PhDs, but do not let that intimidate you, because like you can still break into it. I don't mean to like alarm you, but I do think it's important to have a realistic mindset, especially with how many, I'm filming this in February 2023, there's been a lot of layoffs in the tech industry, and you'll be competing with people who have more experience and perhaps higher degrees. It could be a tough market to compete in, is all I'm saying. The reason why researchers tend to have that higher education is because to teach research and doing sound research, like there's just not really boot camps that teach you stuff like that, I guess. So there's a lot more, because you're teaching something that's cerebral rather than tangible, I guess. UX design, you are doing some cerebral head thinking things, but at the end of the day, you're building something, so it will physically or digitally exist. But growing market has been growing for a while. Okay, how much work and cost will it be to get started? This is the hardest thing. People come and they're like, oh, what's the best way? I don't know. I don't know your circumstances. Is getting an academic pathway into UX research the best way? I don't know. But I will tell you what it gives you is an opportunity to learn about things that are broader than just your actual specifics of methods of how to conduct UX research, like tech ethics, information science. What is information? Smoke from a fire is information. It tells you something. So like those kind of questions, those kind of things, you have space to do that when you're in a grad school program that you just probably don't do if you're building your skill set on the job or individually. And if you go to a certain program, just having that name on your resume may be what gets you the job rather than that program actually being good. And it is hard to find programs in UX. You want to look in the information studies school. Sometimes they're in like the design school, but especially as a researcher, you don't want to go to programs that are solely, focused on design. The way I found what grad schools to apply to was going to human factors ergonomics, like society, whatever thing approves universities for saying like, Yes, they have a society there or something. Maybe it's like an association. I went to that site and then they listed out programs. I'm not going to speak on different programs, one, because I haven't done anything but my own. And then also, faculty defines so much of your experience. I went to UT, but I went to UT when a certain professor was there, and he was a cornerstone in my experience and understanding of UX that now that he doesn't teach there anymore, and without him, that would be really difficult. I don't know what my experience would look like if he wasn't involved in it. Here's the other thing. I'm not going to tell you, okay, boot camp's the right thing for you, grad school's the right thing for you, because I don't know. I am so grateful, but had the luxury of my parents paying for my undergrad college, so I didn't have any tuition debt. So when it came time to decide, okay, what am I going to do next in my life, career-wise, taking on debt for grad school was not as big of a barrier for me as it would be for other people. There's just so many things that determine whether or not something's a good choice for you. What should be encouraging is that every single person that is in UX has come from a different field, a different background. Nobody's graduated with a UX degree. There's just not a UX degree. There's been some programs that have been developed recently in undergrads, so it's becoming maybe something you can specialize in, but people are coming from like information studies. That's the closest thing to UX degree. Overlaps with library science a lot and archives, that stuff, because that's organizing information and helping people find what they need. Like, think of Google. They were doing what librarians are doing, but now it's just involved a computer. So how much work and cost will it be to get started? Baby, I don't know. Grad school is expensive. If you can get a spot like to TA, sometimes that will be cover your tuition, but you still have to, have living expenses and stuff covered. Boot camps, I feel like, are around $10K. I know a lot of people who have started from boot camps, but a lot of them are designers. And I went in thinking I wanted to be a designer and learned I wanted to be a researcher. So that's the other thing that would be hard. It's not uncommon for someone to be already working at a company and then say, hey, I want to kind of get into this. Can I work on some projects? It will be work. You're literally learning a new industry and career. I did not feel comfortable until literally my 4th semester. So it was almost 2 full years before I felt like, oh, I could go up to someone and say like, hey, let me tell you what I should do for you. It's just hard to learn what methods to use in what cases, because it's literally like cooking a recipe without a recipe book. It's like, I don't know, it depends on a lot of things. What's your base? Is it flour? Is it starch? Are those the same thing? I don't know. So anyway. Okay. If you're overwhelmed with materials out there, beginner books, I have a TikTok that goes through that. Maybe I can figure out how to link it below. The number 1 book to start out with. This would be a good assessing your upfront cost of how much work it would be to get started. Start with $18 in the US or $21 in Canada for Don Norman, The Design of Everyday Things. This is a great intro book. I don't know if I've technically actually read it all the way through. With ADHD, what can you do? Which also, what you can do, ow, I hit my funny bone, is what Kat Holmes has done, seen that reading. I joke that like I'm illiterate without my ADHD medication. It's funny, but it's also somewhat kind of almost true. It's really hard to read. But one thing that does make it easier is how Kat Holmes structured. At the end of each chapter, there's takeaways with just bullet point things. Makes it really easy. There's lots of pictures and charts to explain things. It's visual. And then she has these like topic headers in there so that I know, hey, this new topic is being introduced, rather than having to read so many words and make sense of like, oh, she's changing topics now. So this is a great example of how it's not my fault that I struggle to read. Books could just be designed better. I would love to write a book one day, and there are going to be so many pictures and so many QR codes to videos explaining the same thing and PDFs or whatever. Be so fun. But Kat Holmes this is another great book, which it doesn't need to be your first book to read, and it's not specifically UX. She focused on disability and accessibility, so inclusive design, but it should be within your first intro books, because if you're a designer and you're not thinking about accessibility, if you're a researcher and you're not thinking about inclusivity, then you're not doing your job. Everyone has the bias that they're going to design and be interested in things that affect them. My TikToks are a great example. I'll complain about things because I experience it, and I'm like, this is stupid. Does that mean those are the only things worth complaining about? No, but they're top of my mind because I just experienced them. If I then only based what research I conducted at a job based off of what I experienced, that would limit the things that got brought up to what, a person like me experiences. That is why so many things suck, because there's one type of person designing these things and making these decisions. It's an affluent, straight white man. Kill. Just kidding, I will not put that on the internet. That's why another thing that I do think is a good fit for UX, there's so many things that I just notice because either ADHD or anxiety that I'm like, okay, this is bad, that other people don't catch because their brain isn't processing it the same way that mine is. The amount of differences you have is actually to your advantage in this field, which I love. Like, how amazing. Things like your gender, your race, your disabilities or neurodivergences, but also like socioeconomic things too. If you live in a rural area, even if you're introverted versus extroverted, like this world is so extrovert driven in its design decisions. The way the world is designed makes introversion feel like a limiting factor, when in reality it's just a difference. And if we design the world to accommodate the full spectrum, it'd be better for everyone. Which is the premise of designing for people with disabilities, because if you think about it it's called universal design. You have a microscope and you look at someone with such a a magnifying glass. They have such heightened needs. Let's say you have one arm and you're carrying in groceries, which I'm pretty sure that's an example here. You look at, okay, I have more restrictions. What design can I get? We will look at, I'll put in pictures here, like a door handle that's rounded. A door handle with a thingy, good. That allows someone to use like an elbow or any type of weight. And then the universal design thing comes in where, okay, if I have a thing of groceries, but then I also am talking on my phone, so I am temporarily disabled with this hand, then I can use my elbow. So that's something Kat Holmes talks about, is that we have environmental things that make us temporarily disabled where, oh, I can no longer use this hand how I normally used it. So designing for that use case makes it actually better for everyone. Get back to my 1 minute thing. Beginner books, we talked about the design of everyday things. Methods to master first. So I will later on go through my grad school notes and see what topics were introduced first to kind of give me an idea of that. But looking up, just psychology, perception things, just SALT principles, rules of thumb, heuristics, those would be a good area to start. When you actually start to practice UX methods, I think good intro stuff is competitive analysis, heuristic evaluations, but your bread and butter are going to be user interviews and usability tests or evaluations. It doesn't stop there though, because you conduct that, you gather the information, but then you have to analyze it and synthesize it. So that usually looks like affinity diagramming, which is pretty much just like grouping things together that are similar. Outputs of how you deliver those findings, like a journey map or persona, that stuff is probably later on once you develop. That's probably, I think, the most confusing part of being like, a story map, a journey map, a site map, a storyboard? Like, they just all have similar names. It's bad. Okay, UX mantras and good ideas to understand. 1 minute for each of these. I can do that. My throat is hurting. Okay, first one. You are not your user. I judged a competition for new designs and stuff, and so many of the solutions were oriented around college student problems. And that's okay, but you're limiting your world and your perspective of what is an issue based off what you know. If you take that and run with it and say, we full on need to pursue this, that's not a good idea because you're not your user. How you use the product is not going to be how your user uses it. Your problems are not the same as your users. It basically just always means like challenge your own assumption and then recognize you're always going to design with a bias as well. So the things that you think of are going to be based off of solutions that you've encountered before and that have worked for you. For example, this little IKEA clock, it has like 4 sides. One's a timer, one's an alarm, one's a temperature and a stopwatch or whatever. These are all really flat. There's no raised button at all. And so this is a solution that was not designed for someone who's visually impaired. If I can't use my eyes to see these icons, I have no idea what thing I'm turning it to. And all these button noises are the same. So if I were to design this for someone who's visually impaired, maybe there's like a raised bump on probably the clock one, since that's going to be the main one. And then maybe there's different beeps for each like rotation it's on. They do that with elevators. One ding up, 2 dings down, or might be the opposite. But you might not think of it because it's not something you're thinking, oh, I'm going to always be looking at it, but you don't realize like, oh, I might know I have a 5-minute timer set and just want to flip it, and I don't know which way to flip it because I'm trying to look at my screen because it's maybe an interview and I'm trying to time myself and secretly do it and not lose eye contact, whatever the reason is. Just another example of universal design. Okay, second thing, and this one's my favorite. The user is never wrong. And this one is so fun because it goes against everything engineers believe in. And it's just like, dude, I don't know what to tell you other than we're not going to blame our users for how they thought that they should discover something to put in their cart. The reason why this becomes such a tension point is because when engineers and people build out these systems, you have to think in a systematic way. An engineer might look at it and be like, no, they just need to go to the top menu and then find the category and then they'll get it. Whereas I'm a user, I'm like, oh, I think it should just be something I can search or, whatever. But we just approach things differently than we design for. And that is why we have people like myself. And this is also why I think UX research has such good job security. The one thing people can never figure out is humans. That always seems to baffle businesses. People don't understand people. There will always be someone trying to build something and not understanding why it's not resonating or it's not working when people use it. So there's always going to need to be someone who interprets and explains that and is the bridge between the two. Next time you're like, oh, gosh darn it, I am so silly for doing that. Be like, okay, am I? Or is it how something's designed? Did you forget this or that thing? Or was your apartment just not designed in a way that helped you remember your keys on the way out? I have a car key fob, and if I try to lock it with my fanny pack in there, and then it doesn't let me lock it because my key fob's in there. It prevents the human error of locking your keys in your car. That's good design. It's not that it's my fault that I left my keys in there. Yeah, factually, I did leave my keys in there, but we are not going to blame the user because the user's never wrong. That's simple human error. It's the design of the car and the key fob that can be better. I truly believe the user's never wrong. Give me a scenario. I'd love a challenge. Another big thing, accessibility is not added work. It's a part of the work. So accessibility is not something to think about at the end to make sure is, your color contrast is good before you start sending it to engineers to build. Accessibility is not just a checklist, and especially not a checklist at the end of building out your designs. And it needs to be and should be incorporated into all the work that you do. Yes, you'll want to highlight specific accessibility, methods or times where you focus in depth on it, but every small choice you make throughout the process should be also incorporating accessibility. So it's not added work, it's part of the work. So hopefully we learned some things today just from me rambling. Welcome to feedback. Please be nice. Sandwich it with a little compliment or something. But yeah, tell me what you would like to see. Especially one thing I want to balance is I don't want to just repeat what's already out there. So if there's something you can't find or you just don't know where, maybe just a where to start video of linking all this material might be good or something, just let me know. Because I'm not the user, you are the user. So if I design based off my assumptions, it's not going to be as good as if I listen to what you say and design the solution around the problems you're facing. So what's difficult for you? What's not working well? What questions do you have before you want to dive in? What did you enjoy about this? And what did you not enjoy about this video? And don't say my personality. Okay. I am grateful that you're willing to listen to me talk. And the community that we're creating, it does give me energy and spark joy for me. So I thank you and see you in the next video.